I have two global trends and then I'm going to go into some of the more specific trends. What you see here first is the most important, I think, global trend. That is an incredible evolution within actually a relatively short period of time to instant imagery all over the world. It seems like a no-brainer, but for us in the public relations this has been one of the biggest trends that actually hit our profession. Second big trend. You're familiar with the terminology, but this too has been a watershed difference in public relations. We're now dealing with media on a scale that we've never seen before. It has forced us to change completely the way we work. So these are the two global trends. I'm now going into some of the more specific ones there. I'll talk about all of these in some measure, some a little bit more extensive than the other. But you see here what are the most important PR market trends. So let's start with the first one, the digital. Digital and social has been the biggest disruption to public relations. Right now, where we used to have a news cycle that was predictable with the various news outlets, we now have a 24/7 news cycle. It is instantaneous and constant, which has really meant that we have to organize our PR business differently from what it was before. We need to be able to respond always immediately and not just to superficial things. We need to be able to respond immediately and in depth. The immediacy of news also means that we need to be able, as a PR spokesman for our clients or for the businesses for which we work, we need to be able to improvise very quickly when things happen. One of them I can recommend if you're interested later. But the question of transparency is that we know we're news outlets, that they have a certain responsibility for fact-checking and so forth. But a lot of the influencers have none. And a lot of them are basically paid to be influencing on behalf of others again. We're dealing with them as well, and that is sometimes we use them and sometimes we're used by them. And that brings a very different type of playing field as we were used to. Finally, about the biggest disruption is this trendiness and unpredictability. We're all familiar with Twitter and other social media channels that say what is trending right now. Now a lot of it, when you look at it, you say whatever, but some of it is important to us. Everything, of course, depends on what business you're in and what client you work for, but this trendiness can be so fluctuating. That too means that we have to be constantly on the alert, and we have to, in a sense, constantly watch it also for implications for our clients or companies that we work for. So one of the things that when I look back, and I've been working in public relations well over 25 years, is the realization, and still comes on me sometimes, is that people are online all the time. They're communicating all the time. Obviously you cannot follow everything, but somehow as a PR practitioner you have to sort of tap into this to follow what's going on. And some of it is basically weird. What you see here is a thing that happened, I think, 1 or 2 years ago, when someone was sitting in Burger King in the United States, heard a couple quarrel, put the quarrel literally on Twitter and twittered about it, which then became a big issue on Twitter, whether or not this was okay. And I'm gonna go back, I'm gonna go into this in a minute because it touches upon privacy, but it also tells us that news and whatever it is all the time, all the time. So we really need to be watching what's going on all the time as well. So, second change, the change of ownership in the media. I'm sure there's some of you here that are listening to me right now are very used. There's newspapers, there's editors, there's journalists, and whether or not from the TV or whether it's online or whether it's print. But really the media, when we talk about media, what do we mean? Do we the media in the sense of these are the news outlets, or are we talking media such as Facebook is a media and Twitter is media? So the ownership of media has changed fundamentally. There is much more news being put out there on non-conformist channels. So it requires of us a new understanding of what we think of media. There is a lot less editorial quality on many of these media. I found myself in the last couple of years when I still had my agency, often having to respond to rumors that basically had no base in fact, but were considered to be news out there in the world of people that say, you know, like I'm in the news. So we deal as PR professionals and as, you know, the guardians of reputation from our clients, of the companies we work for, with a lot more, not fact-based, but more opinionated news. When we look at the newspaper and what we are used to, is that, okay, the newspaper, the articles in the newspaper are fact-based. But a lot of stuff that is on social media news channels, is not fact-based at all. It's more opinions than facts. And we deal with the audiences, what I found, are kind of losing track of what is opinion and what is actually fact. And that's something that is a bit threatening in a sense for our profession, certainly when we do on fact-based news. So this fragmented authority, where do people really, the audience out there, where do you get their opinions from? Is that from regular news channels, or is that actually from all sorts of online news channels that are not fact-based? Well, it's changing and it's all in flux, but it's something we really need to take a look at. Fine, content. Another big change for us and a big trend in public relations. There are so much media channels out there that there's an unquenchable thirst for content. And the question there is, who will provide this content? Now, yesterday, Asal and I were talking about this. We were talking about these changes. And I said, yeah, well, as a public relations agency or public relations people, we're used to deal with media providing them content. But there's a lot more outlets there that ask content from us that are not traditional media. So do we leave that as PR practitioners to digital agencies and all sorts of new types of outfits, or do we consider this to be the field of public relations? Big discussion right now. I was just in both Qatar and Nigeria just in the last couple of weeks, and this discussion plays there as well. Who owns the content? Who provides the content over all these new media outlets that are there? Then, when we think it is ours, and I think it is content is something for public relations professionals, then it poses new challenges to strategy, creativity, and execution. And I'm going to talk about creativity in a minute. So yes, there are some challenges there for us, but also the hunger for content out there is also lots of opportunities for public relations. And one of these opportunities is that storytelling. Storytelling is in itself, when you talk about content, is a trend within content. We've discovered that audiences respond a lot more to storytelling than they do just to a bunch of facts. And for us as public relations people, we are actually the ones best put in place to do storytelling. Now that requires from us that we move from abstract and general to decide what is the specifics in there, and then we go from facts and numbers to create engaging content. But when we do that, we can be the storytellers of a company's business heart. And this is a field that is wide open for public relations. It does require specific capabilities, and I would always say to PR people, you know, make sure you get this type of capability so you can do this, because it's a big opportunity. Now, I've said before, there are some challenges in this whole area of unbridled content, all this news media and on social media, and that is the digital identity of people. all of us, whether we are PR professionals, when we look at ourselves as PR professionals, or whether we look at ourselves just as citizens and individuals, we are in a constant negotiation online about our digital identity. Of course, we need to protect this for all sort of obvious reasons. We need to use it as a shield, but at the same time, in order to be active on Facebook and all sorts of other social media, we need to release our digital identity as well, and we need to partake in this. And there is a constant battle between these things, and this is constant also going on between the audiences among nonsense that we communicate with as PR professionals. Now I'm going to show you something that is typical of this trend. Is this? Well, you might wonder what this is. This is Tracy Allen. She's an artist. She, a couple of years ago, she put her bed and everything around it in the Museum of Modern Art. What she wanted to show here is that people out there, you know, provide all sorts of things about their personal lives online. We have become to find this quite normal. This is obviously a bit of exaggeration here, but her point is quite clear. Digital identity and our digital identity as we have it online is something also for public consumption. Well, of course, Google Glass failed, but there is no doubt that this will come back in some other form, which again poses serious questions about privacy and identity online. We're also being watched all the time. When it's for our safety, it's okay. But when you think of the fact that you're being watched all over the place and all this data is out there, it is sometimes a little bit less reassuring. This is the world in which PR professionals work. Why is this important for us? Because of this. Some of my clients in the last few years have dealt with precisely this type of thing. There is so much of our lives out there and so much of our data out there that this becomes a whole area in PR which is vulnerable to crisis. And the several companies that we dealt with had this type of crisis. And as PR professionals, we need to be aware of that and we need to learn how to deal with that as well. So we probably are entering a post-privacy world where people share all sorts of things, where at the same time we need to protect it, where at the same time companies use this data to provide people with new services, but then again make themselves vulnerable for all sorts of crises that they may actually endure. We need to see through all this and we need to find out, you know, where people stand. It's a big fluctuation, this field. Now I talked about influencers. I think traditional media is still very influential. Just yesterday, BBC World was and a United Press of Associated Press were all, you know, had news items about finding some debris and possibly the black box of the Egyptian airliner that just came down. Well, when we want to find out what is actually the case with this, we go to traditional media. They're the best place to. You will probably not get your information from somebody who has an opinion about this on Twitter. But at the same time, when it goes on other kind of things, there has been a rise of all sorts of authorities on all sorts of matters that actually exert influence on others. I have dealt with quite a few crisis situations in my career, and sometimes I'm just baffled. What I mean is I'm totally surprised by what people out there are willing to believe for facts, which are basically opinions from others who have really no first-hand knowledge about something, just because they're closer to them on Twitter and they think this is true, and then we have to respond to this. There is an incredible diversity of what we call the vox populi, so the popular voice of people out there. And these type of influencers, whether we like it or not, they have an impact on the well-being of our clients or the companies and organizations that we work for, or the government agencies that we might work for. In my agency a couple of years ago, we formed a sort of special department called Influencers Management. We spend an incredible amount of time on mapping out who is who, who's communicating about what, who's important to us, who we need to be in touch with, who we need to provide information to, and who we need to influence so that they influence again. It's a kind of a little bit of a confusing world but it's, yeah, we need to find a way through there. And the rise of influencers, whether or not they base their information on actual facts, is debatable, but the thing is we cannot go around it. And I would recommend any communication department invest time and money into mapping this out, because if you leave it sort of unattended, you're going to be, you know, running after the facts. Now I said content is there's an unquenchable thirst for content out there on the media, which means for us a lot of opportunities. Are we as PR people the ones who provide this content? And I think we are, but we need to be a lot more creative on it. And this is one of my topics that I really like to speak about. I'll just be brief on it right now. But the PR world is increasingly judged by our clients on our level of creativity. And there's a problem with that. Historically, the PR world isn't great on creativity. We're used to be communicating with press, with professional media as we call it, which are now called traditional media. These journalists, you know, they appreciate sometimes some creativity if we organize something interesting for them to make it newsworthy, but really what they want is just facts, information that they can work with and they might be creative with. But we're communicating with a whole new type of audiences, as I said before. There is so much more media out there, paid, shared, owned, and so forth. So we need to be a lot more creative in what we do with that, otherwise we will leave it to others to do this. So, well, from our focus on traditional press and media, we need to focus on other type of channels, because we'll have directly access to audiences, and we should not leave that field to others. Now there is, you're probably familiar with the Holmes report, Paul Holmes. He has a continuing research into the creativity on the PR world. And I've just reproduced here a couple of pages from his last report in creativity. What it shows is that the PR world, and this is a global research, the PR world doesn't have the best view of itself, the best opinion, it doesn't have the most positive opinion about itself, about its level of creativity. They see various obstacles to that. I'll just briefly mention a few. They also see some opportunities, and one of these opportunities is indeed in storytelling, what I would just mention to you. Storytelling is a big field that everybody is involved with. There's a lot of type of topics that are very important to companies that lend itself for greatly lend itself for storytelling. Sustainable growth and sustainable business being one of these. So, what is that the PR world complains about? Well, they complain when it comes to creativity of lack of budget, lack of time, lack of guts, daring, lack of risk-taking, and lack of skills to be there. Not sure if any one of you recognizes any of these obstacles. I'm just curious. Most of you will work in PR, so do you recognize some of these things? Anybody?
Yes.
You do?
Yeah.
Because I'll go into a minute. Storytelling, content creation, obviously, and an emotional resonance, creating emotional resonance through your communication. The PR world sees these are where our big opportunities for creativity lie. Well, why is it that the PR world has a problem? It's simply this. We are far too tactical oriented. We always wonder, you know, we always rush to making a plan. We rush often through plan making. Then as soon as we got the plan, we're always worried about how we're going to execute that plan, and we spend lots of time on figuring out how to execute that plan. We rather make the plan simple so that we know how to execute the plan. So we are very tactical oriented always. But my point is this: when strategy is lacking, then creativity will start wandering, and tactics will also go astray. And I think that probably you recognize this as well. This is the fundamental, it's the heart of the problem with creativity in the PR world. Time is one of those things. We do not really spend enough time on strategy, and we do not really spend enough time on plan making. We have too little idea time to lead to solid and consistent creative output. Idea time is very difficult. I've seen it all these years with my agency too. If we tell our client, here's the bill, and we spend 12 or 20 hours on trying to figure out something creative, he said, you know, they don't like to pay for it. They don't actually like to see it. They just like to see the plan and like to see us busy. But the point is really that if you don't spend enough time on that, it's not going to work. Because real creativity is a matter of discovery. You need to give yourself time to discover. I always say this, really creative PR people are explorers, just like the old-fashioned explorers were when the world was not really known to us all, and they still had